if one of your tenants had been dead for years, but never stopped paying rent. When the cameras reveal no sign of them ever entering or leaving, you realize some doors should never be opened. The ghost tenant. The rain tapped gently against the old apartment windows, a sound that usually brought the comfort to Darren Miller, a 38-year-old landlord who had inherited the 4-story building from his late uncle. The old Victorian structure, nestled in a quiet street of Alderfield, had seen better days, but Darren took pride in maintaining it. It was a simple business. Keep the place clean, fix what breaks, and collect the rent. But things started to change the day he noticed something strange about apartment 3B. Darren always handled the rent collection himself. Most tenants paid online, but one, Mr. Eli Turner from 3B, insisted on leaving a physical check in the rent drop box outside the lobby. Every month, without fail, a crisp envelope appeared. No late payments, no maintenance requests, no complaints. Yet, Darren couldn't remember ever meeting Mr. Turner in person. At first, he thought nothing of it. Some tenants were private. He respected that. But curiosity got the better of him. One rainy evening, when he noticed the check again, same handwriting, same perfume-like scent on the envelope, like something from another era. That night, after finishing some plumbing in the basement, Darren found himself standing outside apartment 3B. The hallway was silent, the dim lights flickering with age. He raised his hand to knock, but paused. A strange chill crept down his spine, as if the very air outside the door didn't want him there. He knocked once. Silence. Twice. Still no answer. He leaned in, listening. No footsteps. No TV. Nothing. Feeling a bit foolish, he turned to leave. Just then, he heard the faint sound of something moving inside, like the rustling of paper. He waited, heart thudding, but it stopped. The next morning, driven by a mix of unease and curiosity, Darren checked the tenant records. Mr. Eli Turner had been listed as a tenant for over 3 years, since May 2022. Paid on time, no reported issues. He pulled up the file. Everything seemed normal, until he reached the emergency contact section. It listed an old phone number and a next of kin name, Margaret Turner. He Googled her. Margaret Turner had died in 2020. The obituary mentioned her son, Eli Turner, who had reportedly died just weeks after her from a heart attack. That couldn't be right. He cross-checked with a public death database. There it was. Eli Turner, deceased, 2020. But then, who had been paying rent in 3B? Cold dread pooled in Darren's stomach. He rushed to check the building's security footage. The lobby had a camera above the rent drop box, and another one in the main hallway leading to the stairwell and elevator. He started scrubbing through footage from the past 6 months. Hours passed. Tenants came and went. Packages were delivered. But apartment 3B's door never opened. No one entered. No one left. And yet, the rent envelopes kept appearing. Determined, Darren placed a hidden camera directly facing apartment 3B's door, disguised as part of a light fixture. That night, he couldn't sleep. The building creaked as if protesting his curiosity. At 2:47 a.m., a strange electrical hum filled the air. The lights in the hallway flickered again, then silence. The next morning, he ran to check the footage. At exactly 2:47 a.m., The camera feed went static for 7 minutes. When the feed returned, nothing had changed, except now a rent envelope sat neatly in the drop box. Darren's heart pounded. He needed answers. He spoke to some of the other tenants. Mrs. Halley from 4A said she'd never seen anyone in 3B. That place always felt off, she whispered. Sometimes I hear footsteps when no one's supposed to be there. Mr. Jefferson, a retired police officer from 2C, recalled something chilling. I've been here 5 years. I remember a guy named Eli Turner moving in, but I also remember seeing the coroner's van outside not long after. Thought he died and someone else took over. Never saw who, though. The building itself seemed to respond to the mystery. Lights near 3B began dimming more often. A cold draft always lingered in the hallway, and at night, Darren began hearing faint whispers through the vent system. Soft, almost like breathing. Despite everything, he wasn't ready to accept the truth. He considered a break-in, just to prove to himself that it was all a misunderstanding. But something inside warned him, don't open that door. Instead, he called the police, explaining he was concerned about a tenant who might be squatting or using a stolen identity. They agreed to perform a wellness check. 2 officers arrived that afternoon. Darren guided them up to the 3rd floor, his heart hammering with each step. As they stood outside 3B, one officer knocked. Mr. Turner, it's the Alderfield Police Department. We're conducting a wellness check. No response. They knocked again. Silence. The officer turned to Darren. You have the key, hands trembling. Darren handed it over. The officer inserted the key, turned the knob, and pushed the door open slowly. What they found inside would haunt Darren forever. The apartment was covered in thick layers of dust, as if untouched for years. Cobwebs hung like curtains across the ceiling. A table by the window held a teacup filled with blackened residue and mold. Newspapers dated 2020 were piled in a corner, and on the couch sat a skeleton, dressed in an old cardigan and slacks. A wallet lay on the coffee table. Inside was an ID card. Eli Turner, born 1976, died 2020. The officer stepped back in horror. This man's been dead for years. But as they turned to leave, Darren noticed something chilling. The rent envelope for April was already in the hallway box, and he hadn't placed it there. The apartment was sealed off after the police investigation, but that didn't stop the nightmares. Darren barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the skeleton again, sunken in that faded couch, still wearing a cardigan, as if waiting for someone to return. The worst part wasn't the remains themselves, but the sense of presence still lingering in the room, something that didn't want to be disturbed. The police had closed the case as a long-term, undiscovered death. They chalked up the rent checks to fraud, or a roommate keeping quiet. But Darren knew better. There was no roommate. The apartment had been empty and sealed for 3 years. No signs of forced entry, no recent fingerprints. And yet, the checks were real, dated, signed, cleared by the bank. And now, even after the apartment had been locked again by police tape, another envelope had appeared in the rent box. April's payment. He couldn't explain it, but something wasn't done with him yet. A few days later, Darren returned to apartment 3B. He stared at the yellow tape stretched across the door, its bold black letters warning him to stay away. His instincts told him to listen, but the envelope haunted him. He reached out and knocked, half joking to himself. Why are you even doing this? He thought. Knock, knock. Silence. Then, a soft click from inside. Darren froze. He stepped back. The door remained closed, the tape undisturbed. Maybe it had been the building settling or the pipes shifting, but he could have sworn he heard the deadbolt unlock from the other side. He turned away and walked briskly down the hall. Behind him, the light above 3B flickered once, then went out. That night he watched the hidden hallway camera footage again. It had been recording steadily since the officers left. At 2:47 a.m. again, the feed glitched. The screen went to static for exactly 7 minutes, and when it returned, the hallway light above 3B was dark, but something else had changed. A shadow hissed. Before the glitch, the hallway was empty, but after, something tall and faint appeared near the door. Not a person, more like the outline of one, a silhouette, darker than the darkness itself, standing just beside the entrance to 3B. Darren paused the frame and leaned in. The shape didn't move, didn't fade. It just stood there, watching the camera. Darren decided to dig deeper into Eli, Turner's past. He visited the town library and combed through old newspapers and archives. After hours of searching, he found a small obituary in the Alderfield Times from 2020. Eli Turner, 44, passed away unexpectedly in his home. A quiet man, he is survived by no immediate family. Neighbors described him as reclusive but kind. His mother, Margaret Turner, died 3 weeks prior. There were no details about the cause of death, no mention of funeral arrangements. It was as if Eli had quietly disappeared from the world, and the world barely noticed. A librarian, an older woman with graying hair and a sharp memory, noticed Darren flipping through old clippings. "You looking into the Turner boy?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "Yes," Darren said. "Did you know him?" "I knew of him," she replied. "Used to see him here some evenings, always reading about spiritualism. Ghosts. Said he believed the dead could stay connected if the body was never disturbed. That made Darren's skin crawl." "Why would he believe that?" She shrugged. "Maybe he didn't want to be alone. He and his mother were close. Too close, if you ask me. After she passed, he started saying he could still hear her in the apartment, that she wasn't really gone." Darren thanked her and left, unease growing in his chest like a slow-forming storm. Back at the building, he couldn't help but glance at 3B every time he passed it. One night, as he made his final rounds before bed, he paused outside the door again. It was quiet. Then, faintly, a scratching sound from inside. He leaned closer. Scritch, scritch, like fingernails dragging along wood. Darren backed away. "No," he whispered to himself. "Nope." He returned to his unit and locked every door and window. He even unplugged the hallway camera. Maybe ignorance was safer. But that night, he woke to find the envelope for May's rent on his doormat. Inside his own apartment, there was no stamp, no postmark, no way it had been mailed. Just a simple note in that same precise handwriting. "Thank you for your patience. I'm not ready to leave yet." The next day, Darren brought in a paranormal investigator, a young woman named Kayla, who specialized in residual hauntings and energy readings. She entered the building with a handheld EMF reader, a thermal camera, and a skeptical smile. "I've dealt with over 100 so-called hauntings," she said. 99 are just bad wiring or overactive imaginations. And the 1%? Darren asked. Kayla's smile faded. You don't want to meet the 1%. She walked the building slowly, the EMF reader buzzing occasionally near old sockets and frayed cables. But when she reached the 3rd floor, just outside 3B, the reader spiked violently. Red lights flashed. The device screeched. Okay, she said slowly. That's not electrical. Then she turned to Darren. Whatever's here, it's intelligent. It knows we're watching. The temperature in the hallway dropped 10 degrees in a single moment. A whisper echoed through the vent. She doesn't belong here. Kayla froze. Did you hear that? She whispered. Darren nodded. Suddenly, her camera battery died. Her EMF reader went black. Time to go, she said quickly. Don't open that door. I mean it. Whatever's on the other side. It wants you to. Later that night, Darren received a call from one of the tenants, a young college student named Ryan who lived in 4C. Mr. Miller, I think someone's in the hallway. Darren sat up. Where? Outside 3B. I saw them standing there. I thought it was you, but when I said your name, they didn't answer, just turned and walked into the wall. Darren rushed upstairs, but the hallway was empty. Only the cold remained. And on the door of apartment 3B, someone had written, in faint, smudged letters, "Still here." Darren didn't sleep that night. He sat on the couch, wide awake, watching the door of his apartment. The words, "Still here," echoed in his mind, looping like a whisper in a dark room. He had been a landlord for 10 years. He'd dealt with every type of tenant imaginable. Noisy, messy, demanding. But nothing had prepared him for this. A tenant who never left. A tenant who never aged. A tenant who had been gone for years. At 3:15 a.m., just as he began to doze off, his phone vibrated. On the coffee table, a message flashed across the screen. Unknown number. You shouldn't have brought her. Darren stared at the text. No name, no number. Just that simple, chilling sentence. He replied immediately. Who is this? No response. The room seemed to grow quieter. Even the old radiator had gone silent, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The next morning, Darren went to apartment 3B again. This time, he wasn't looking for answers. He just wanted peace. He stood in front of the door, tape still stretched across the frame. But something was different today. The air felt heavier, the hallway colder. Then, from inside the apartment, came a sound. Thud. A single, soft noise. Like a box falling over. Darren turned the knob. Locked. He knelt down and peeked under the door. Just darkness. Then, suddenly, a shadow moved, fast, blocking the gap. He jumped back, heart pounding. For a moment, he thought he saw a face pressed against the peephole from inside, pale, with sunken eyes, watching him. But when he looked again, it was gone. Unable to take the stress any longer, Darren visited a small antique bookstore downtown. It had a strange little section on spiritual energy, hauntings, and unsolved mysteries. He wasn't a believer. Not really. But at this point, logic had failed him. An older man behind the counter watched as Darren flipped through a dusty book titled Echoes of the Unrested. You looking for something specific? The man asked. Yeah, Darren replied, eyes still on the page. Ever heard of someone staying behind long after they're gone? The man nodded slowly. Spirits don't always leave when the body does. Sometimes they cling to places, objects, regrets. Can they interact with the living? Oh yes, he said, especially if they think something's been taken from them, or if they still believe they have unfinished business. Darren hesitated. What if someone's been paying rent for years, but they've been gone the whole time? The man's eyes narrowed. Then someone or something wants to stay unnoticed, and they've been doing a good job of it. Darren bought the book, and on the last page, handwritten, in the corner, was a note. Don't enter the room alone. It doesn't like to be watched. Back at the building, Darren reviewed the lease again. Eli Turner's signature was on every document, but something felt off. The handwriting from the lease didn't exactly match the rent checks. They were similar, but not identical. Then he remembered something Kayla had said during her visit. It knows we're watching. He turned the page over and scribbled a few lines of his own signature beside the copies. There it was. The rent checks weren't written by Eli at all. They were written by someone imitating him. Or something. That evening, Darren received another call from Ryan in 4C. Mr. Miller, I'm sorry to bother you again, he said nervously, but I just heard music coming from 3B. What kind of music? Old, like a record. Something slow. A piano, maybe. It started out soft, but then it got loud. Real loud. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. Darren climbed the stairs immediately. By the time he reached the 3rd floor, the music had stopped. He pressed his ear to the door of 3B. Silence. Then, a single note on a piano, clear and unmistakable, played inside. Darren turned and walked away. He didn't even try to open the door. The next morning, he called Kayla again. I think it's escalating, he said. The messages, the music, the shadows. I don't think it wants to leave. Kayla agreed to come back. This time, she brought something different. A small black box with a blinking red light. It's a motion-activated audio recorder, she explained. We'll leave it overnight outside the door. If anything moves, it'll capture the sound. They placed the recorder on the floor, just beneath the peephole. Then they waited. The next day, Darren retrieved the recorder and played back the file. It began with the soft hum of the hallway. Then, around 2 a.m., there was a click, the sound of a doorknob turning. Then, footsteps, slow, uneven, shuffling. A low voice whispered something too faint to understand. And finally, right before the recording cut off, a chilling phrase. You opened the door. Now you have to listen. That night, Darren dreamed of apartment 3B. In the dream, he stood in front of the door, key in hand. He unlocked it slowly. As the door creaked open, a thick darkness spilled out. Not smoke, not shadow, but something alive. Inside, a figure sat in the center of the room. It was Eli Turner, but his eyes were wide open, unmoving. A smile stretched across his face, and behind him, a second figure, a woman, stood completely still, her head tilted, watching. Darren woke up gasping for air. He'd had enough. If the police couldn't explain it and the paranormal expert couldn't stop it, he had to do something himself. He decided to open the door, not with force, but with understanding. Maybe Whatever was inside just wanted to be heard. He placed a note on the door of 3B. "I'm listening. What do you need?" Then he waited. That night, as the clock struck midnight, there was a knock on his door. Not loud, not urgent, just a quiet, polite knock. He opened it slowly. No one was there, but lying on the floor was a box, a small wooden box, carved with symbols he didn't recognize, and taped to the top, a message in that familiar handwriting. "Do not open unless you're ready to see everything." Darren stared at the wooden box on his doorstep for several minutes, unsure whether to pick it up or leave it exactly where it was. It looked old, hand-carved, with symbols etched into the surface. Some were geometric, triangles within circles, while others resembled letters from a forgotten language. The tape holding the note on top had started to peel slightly, revealing a faded line beneath. He crouched down and picked it up. The box felt cold, almost unnaturally so, like it had just come out of a freezer. He brought it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and sat in silence. The note read, "Do not open unless you're ready to see everything." He ran his fingers over the surface of the box. It didn't have a keyhole, no latch, no visible seam. And yet, somehow, it could open. He could feel it. Darren stood up, paced the room, then poured himself a glass of water. His mind was racing. Every instinct told him to leave the box alone. But curiosity, that quiet whisper in the back of his mind, was louder. What if it held answers? What if this was the key to the mystery? He sat back down, took a deep breath, and slowly, carefully, opened the box. Nothing leapt out. No sudden chill filled the room. Inside was a single item, an old black and white photograph. It showed a hallway, his hallway, the one outside apartment 3B. But the image was distorted. The wallpaper in the photo was peeling. The lights were flickering. And at the end of the hall stood a figure, Eli Turner. He was standing perfectly still, facing the camera, but his eyes were blurred, not by the photo's age, something else, as if they'd been smudged on purpose. Behind Eli, the door to 3B was wide open, and inside that doorway was another figure, a woman, half shrouded in darkness. Her arms were at her sides, and her face was turned slightly toward Eli, as if watching him, or waiting for him. Darren flipped the photo over. On the back, written in red ink, were the words, "She never left." The next day, Darren invited Kayla back to the building. He didn't tell her about the photo yet. He needed her help with something more immediate. "I want to open the apartment," he said. 3B, tonight." Kayla hesitated. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "No, but I think I have to." That evening, just after sunset, they stood outside the door together. Darren held the key in his hand. His fingers trembled slightly, and his stomach twisted into knots. Kayla set up her camera on a tripod facing the hallway. "Just in case," she said, "we'll document everything." Darren unlocked the door. It opened with a soft creak. The air that escaped was stale and cold. It smelled faintly of dust, time, and something else. Something harder to define. Not foul, just old. They stepped inside. The apartment was completely still. Dust covered every surface. The curtains were drawn, and the only light came from the hallway behind them. Furniture sat exactly as it had in the original lease photos from years ago. Nothing seemed out of place until Darren noticed the piano. It stood in the corner of the living room, untouched, but somehow not dusty. Its keys gleamed slightly in the dim light, and one of them, middle C, was pressed down. Kayla walked over and released the key. It bounced back up with a gentle click. Then, without warning, another key pressed down by itself. They both froze. Kayla whispered, "Did you see that?" Before Darren could respond, a soft sound came from down the hallway, toward the bedroom. Tap, 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 like fingernails against glass. Darren motioned toward the hallway. "Let's go." Every step they took felt heavier. The bedroom door was closed. Kayla reached for the knob and paused. "You ready?" Darren nodded. She opened the door. The room was empty, clean, undisturbed, but on the far wall, the closet door was slightly ajar. Inside the closet was a mirror, not a modern one. It was tall, with an ornate frame, and the glass had a faint silver tint, as if it had aged over time. And in the mirror's reflection, they saw her, the woman from the photo. She stood behind them, still and silent, wearing a long dress. Her eyes weren't angry. They were sad, heavy with something that couldn't be said. Kayla turned around quickly. No one was there. She looked back at the mirror. Gone. Darren stepped forward and touched the mirror's frame. His fingers brushed against something taped to the back. He pulled it free. It was a letter, sealed in an envelope. It was addressed to the one who sees. Back in Darren's apartment, they opened the letter together. The handwriting was shaky, as if written by someone much older. "I am Eleanor, and I once lived in apartment 3B. I died here, alone, waiting for someone who never came. Eli Turner was kind. He saw me when no one else did, but he left one day and never returned. I stayed, hoping, yearning. My sorrow stained this place, but I do not wish harm. I just want to be remembered, not forgotten like dust in the corners of time. If you're reading this, you've seen me. That's all I ever needed." A quiet settled over the room. Kayla whispered. She just wanted to be known. Darren felt a lump in his throat. The fear that had haunted him was slowly being replaced by something else. Understanding. That night, Darren printed the letter and the photo. He placed them in a frame and hung them on the hallway wall outside 3B. A simple plaque beneath it read, "Eleanor, you are seen." From that day forward, the building felt lighter, warmer. Tenants stopped complaining about cold spots or odd noises. The music stopped. The whispers faded. But every now and then, when the hallway is quiet and the light hits the mirror just right, you can still catch a glimpse, not of a ghost, but of a woman watching, finally at peace. Weeks passed. The building had grown quieter, not in the eerie, unsettling way it once had, but in a peaceful, almost reverent stillness. Darren noticed the change almost immediately. No more flickering lights in the hallway. No more unexplained piano notes in the middle of the night. No more whispers through vents or shadowed corners. Just silence. Comfortable silence. Since placing Eleanor's framed photo and letter outside apartment 3B, the entire building seemed to breathe differently. tenants no longer reported strange occurrences. Kayla uploaded her footage to her channel, carefully edited to maintain privacy, and titled it, "The Tenant Who Was Never Gone." The video went viral. Comments poured in. "I got chills. She just wanted to be remembered. That's so sad and beautiful. This is the most respectful paranormal video I've ever seen." Kayla's respectful approach to the story gained her not only followers, but praise from paranormal researchers and historians. But for Darren, the experience was personal. He often found himself standing outside 3B, staring at the photo, remembering the letter, to the one who sees. One evening, he decided to do something he hadn't done in years: host a small gathering for the building's tenants. Nothing fancy, just coffee, snacks, and a chance to chat. Something to bring the people together again. They met in the lobby that Saturday evening, seated around the soft couches with warm lighting overhead. Music played softly from a Bluetooth speaker, and laughter replaced the usual quiet tension. Mr. Kapoor from 4A brought pastries. The Nguyen sisters from 2C helped to decorate. Even Mrs. Lamb from 1B, who rarely left her apartment, showed up with a smile and a tin of cookies. Darren stood and raised a glass of sparkling water. "I know we've had some strange times here," he said, voice steady. "And maybe not everyone believes in the things that happen. But I do know this: buildings carry memories, and sometimes those memories just want to be acknowledged." The room nodded. No one questioned it. Some smiled knowingly. "But we're here now," he continued, "and I think we've made peace with the past, and maybe even with each other." They toasted. Later that night, Darren stood once again in front of apartment 3B. The door remained closed, but he didn't feel afraid. The photo and letter in the frame still looked as they did weeks ago, though now someone had added a small flower beside it. A daisy. He smiled. Then, for the first time in a long while, he unlocked the door, not to investigate, not to search for shadows, but to clean. Dust had settled again, though not as thick. He opened windows, letting in fresh air. He gently covered the piano and tidied the room. In the bedroom, the mirror still stood, its glass faintly cloudy, reflecting the soft glow of city lights. And for a brief second, just a second, he thought he saw her. Eleanor, not sad, not lost, smiling. He blinked. She was gone, but the room still felt full. A few days later, Darren received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph, another black and white image. This time, it showed apartment 3B, but in this version, sunlight streamed through the curtains. The furniture looked newer, and a woman sat at the piano, fingers gently poised above the keys. Eleanor. She looked peaceful. Her hair was tied back, and her expression was calm, almost joyful. On the back of the photo was a message written in that same red ink. "Thank you." 6 months later, apartment 3B was rented again. Darren had been unsure at first. He considered keeping it closed permanently, a kind of tribute. But something inside him, some quiet intuition, told him Eleanor wouldn't want that. She had been seen, she had been remembered, and now she had moved on. The new tenant, a young teacher named Rachel, fell in love with the apartment the moment she stepped in. "It just feels right," she said, warm. She didn't know the full story, only that it had once been vacant for a long time. Darren told her the basics. There's history here, good history. A woman who once lived here is now at peace. Rachel smiled. I'm glad. She moved in the following week, and from what Darren could tell, she was happy. The piano remained now part of the decor. Sometimes, as he passed by, he could hear gentle melodies playing. Nothing eerie, just soft, thoughtful music, almost like someone else was still listening. Kayla continued her investigations elsewhere, but often stayed in touch. Every now and then, she returned to visit the building, sometimes bringing her followers along via live stream. But she never tried to dig further into Eleanor's story. She felt it had ended exactly as it should. There's beauty in closure, she once said. Not everything haunted has to stay scary, Darren agreed. He no longer feared the shadows, no longer scanned CCTV footage at 3 a.m., looking for a figure that shouldn't be there. He had learned something powerful, that the past doesn't always seek revenge. Sometimes it just seeks a voice, a witness, someone who sees. On the 1-year anniversary of the discovery, Darren placed fresh daisies by the photo of Eleanor. He lit a small candle and stood in silence for a moment. There were no whispers, no cold drafts, just the warm hum of a building at peace. And if you stood very still, if the hallway was quiet, you might hear music, a single note from the piano, a soft reminder. She was here, she is remembered, and she is free.